Hello, and welcome to Defense Disrupted. My name is Ian. I'm the co-founder of TurbineOne, and it's an honor today to be joined by one of my teammates, Brandi Evans. Welcome, Brandi. Welcome to Defense Disrupted.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We're going to give a couple of opportunities here to share your extraordinary story and share your perspectives on this industry that we're working in with such a mission-driven commitment. You spent over 25 years in the defense industry, a lot in acquisitions, and 17 of those years, I think, was in support of the special operations community. So as a form of introduction to tell a little bit about your story and your background, can I just give you a quick question here to share a little bit of how did you first join the government work?
That one's kind of interesting. So, both of my parents are or were retired civil servants. So, I went into the family business, I guess you could say. So, it's interesting because when I was younger, I thought I wanted to be one thing, like many of us. I can honestly say, growing up, I never said, "Oh man, I really want to go work for the government." That was not my goal in life, right? But circumstances happened and I was very young and I found myself as a single mom and my dad said, "You know, there's this position open in the courthouse in downtown Dallas, which is where I grew up." And he said, "You should go see about applying for it because it's a great opportunity. It's a steady job. There's a lot of security at that time in government work." And so he said, just go see about it. Well, I had to take an exam to be a clerk, right? You had to take like a typing exam and different things, make sure you actually understood English, I'm guessing at the time. And it was kind of weird because I was 18 and I took this exam. And anyways, I got hired as a GS3. I'm not even sure those exist anymore, but I was working for it was a government printing office. So it was a congressional printing office in the courthouse that did like government printing, right? So it's like a bookstore, but only for things like codes of federal regulation, things that you had to have for businesses or government organizations and things like that. So I mean, this was way back. Let's be honest. I'm not super young, but we looked up things on microfiche. I'm not even sure that the like young people now even know what that is. But we that was our library catalog was on microfiche film. So, anyways, we didn't have computers. I think we had one computer at some point after I started working there that was one of the very old like DOS systems that you couldn't really use because nobody knew how to actually type in the right prompts. So it was interesting, but that's how I started out. I was a clerk, I was a GS3, and I was still going to college part time. So I was working, going to college, raising a child, and then it kind of led to, hey, I finished my degree and I found this intern program, right? By then I had gotten myself up to a GS5, high dollars, So and I was kinda doing accounting at that point. I had transitioned, I was like an accounting tech, and my dad's like, "Hey," and I got a my dad is my hero and is no longer with us, but he really always had, like, wise information for me, and he said, "Hey, there's this outstanding scholar program that the Army has. It's an intern program, but you don't have to have any background in the different fields that they offer. They assume that if you're good in school and you come out with a high GPA, that you can learn what you need to learn." So he said, "I think you should apply for that." And I'm like, "Oh, that's a great idea, Dad." So I applied for it, and sure enough, I got it. And so that started my intern work. So it was like a 7-9-11. So you started out as a GS7, and then a year later, if you were doing the right thing, you got promoted to a 9, and then at the end, you got promoted to an 11. And my that was like moving up big time. And before that, I hadn't really worked for the military per se. I was working for, the congressional office, and then I was working for the Defense Commissary Agency as an accounting tech, as the 5, right? Just odd things that I just kind of happened into. And then I I took that job and I went to work for the Army Reserve Command in Atlanta back when they were at Fort McPherson. And that base is no longer there. It's been bracked since then. But I went to work for them, and I went to work there as a GS7 intern on in August of 2001. So I remember sitting in the chaplain's office talking to him about something there one day on September 11th. And I thought there was a movie playing in on his TV screen behind him, but it was, the planes. So I have never known pre 9/11 op tempo in the military. I came in a month into my internship, 9/11 happened. So, and of course, at that point, the reserves started calling people up, right? They were calling folks up, and we had been at peace for, gosh, most of my lifetime at that point, except for, the first Gulf War. But we started getting congressionals and I started helping with those, doctors, lawyers, different folks who, at the end of the day thought they signed up during peacetime and then realized, oh crap, now I'm going to have to go get deployed and I'm going to lose a lot of money, you know? And basically you write these things up saying, there was fine print. We paid for your education. Congratulations, you've earned your ticket over to the desert. So anyways, long story, but that's kinda how I ended up in government. It was not my passion, but it quickly became my passion.
And started as a family business too, which I never knew until just now, and that's rather fascinating. But thank you for sharing those stories about your father. Part of the privilege here of chatting with you is that I know you as a seasoned defense acquisition leader, career in a lot of aspects of special operations community, a lot of intel, a lot of airborne surveillance and reconnaissance, sensor development, intelligence software programs. You have worked with a lot of very complex systems in the acquisition side, which is a influential and complicated part of the larger military industrial complex. And so to hear that it started out as a like clerk and accounting intern is actually kind of fascinating because it shows you at the earliest stages of your young career had to get into the details, had to make the numbers work, had to understand contracts matter. With the joke about the medical professionals, there's fine print. That fine print's actually pretty important when it comes to your scholarship, but also in the way you buy things and the way things get fielded and the way ultimately very large companies make a whole lot of money. And so I see that as maybe a segue to the later stages of your career. If we can go from your first job to maybe one of your last jobs, it seems quite clearly that with a tradition of family service, government service, public service, you also had a chance to see things through transformations. So you had that big defining experience in 9/11. Jump forward a little bit. Can you tell us about your last job in military service? It seems as a civilian. What were some of the jobs and titles and responsibilities you had at the end of that military career?
Yeah, so that would be, I'm now in Tampa and retired out of the SOCOM community here and was working in SOF ATNL as a program manager. I moved here about 6 to 7 years ago now. Prior to that, I had been at Fort Bragg working joint special operations. But when I came here, I started out as a program manager for sensitive activities, special comms, things like that. Spent about 2 years doing that because that was my background, coming to the command. And then I moved over to become the PM for the Intel portfolio within Soft Digital Applications. SDA, Digital Applications, had just stood up about a year or two prior. And so I came in to take over. I was the first female PM in that PEO. I was also, I think, the first PM for the Intel portfolio as it transitioned into what it is now in SDA. And so that was all software based, and the acquisition pathways, right, have been adjusted and updated so that the government could attempt to do what private industry does and somehow iterate and get software out faster, right? You can't treat software like a major acquisition program. We're not going to spend 10 years developing it and then fielding it. By then, it's too late. right? It's too late probably 6 months after somebody says what they need in the software world. So, I was the 2nd program to fall under the software acquisition pathway right behind the COP, the Common Operating Picture group. So, we were the SIP side of that, the Intel picture, and we were supporting all the all source Intel analysts out in the field and making sure they had the tools they needed to do their job, along with the GeoInt folks and the FMB kind of thing. Well, about 2 years of that, and somebody said, "Have I got a gig for you?" PEO fixed wing has kind of a weird doesn't really fit into, it's not the MC-130s, it's not the CV-22s, it's not necessarily the normal, crewed planes that they're used to dealing with. We have a portion of this portfolio, a whole division that's airborne ISR and non-standard aviation, so mostly UAVs, the U-28, the MQ-9s, the MQ-1s. It's kind of the catch-all of, "Hey, these don't really fit into the rest of the portfolio, but they do fit together." So, they asked me to come over and take that on, and a program at that time that was we had a somewhat of a requirement, but it wasn't fully defined yet, and it obviously wasn't a program of record yet, but the Adaptive Airborne Enterprise was a big piece of where that portfolio was going, and so I came on board and kinda took that over, and now we have a program called the Adaptive Airborne Enterprise.
I love, if I may, to go back to a point you were describing about your trailblazing personal experiences as a project manager for intelligence within Program Executive Office Software Digital Applications, POSDA. Okay. I think you said software acquisitions wasn't working. Can we talk about that a bit? I think that that's a story that this audience would love to hear a little bit more about, given your frontline, administratively frontline nature of why did that have to happen? Why does you mentioned briefly the 10-year sales cycles of certain systems being different than software. Can we expand on that a bit? Why does the government struggle with software? Why does the acquisition system needed to get updated as it did in your first experiences? And also, what was it like? Even if it was established, chartered, obviously with a lot of important systems going through it, did people get it? Did folks understand how to do software or anything like it? I think there's so much I think to unpack there. So I'd love for you to reflect a bit more about those experiences.
Yeah, no, I don't think people got it. Wi I The government is not good at adapting quickly. I would say SOCOM was a little better than the big services. They adapted it as quickly, I think, or before anyone else necessarily. But so traditionally, acquisition, you only had a few options when you were, establishing a program or trying to run a program, and it was the traditional major capability program or, we had a little leeway if you had an operational need that was urgent, you could at least get something going, that was kind of a fast path to get something to the warfighter. But there wasn't really anything out there that was able to be used for the software programs. You don't wanna do a major capability because software is constantly changing, right? And you want it to be constantly changing. Software, in effect, is never done. So, it's a program in perpetuity, really. You may or may not have, the same software at the end. It may be a conglomeration of plug and play type of things depending on what the user's needs are at the time. But you have to have the flexibility and the agility to deliver something more rapidly. And it may not be exactly what they're asking for, but you can give them a minimum viable product and then start to iterate on that to get them to the point where they're receiving, constant updates and features and, the things that they're asking for, and we just didn't have a process to do that until, thankfully, DOW now, provided a pathway for software. You know, Folks in the commercial environment, as you well know, Silicon Valley, like, they were already doing these things. They were already doing PI planning and sprinting and, were very flexible and able to adapt and to say, "Hey, this isn't working. We're gonna throw this out and try something else." And so that whole motto of failing fast kind of came up with this. It's okay. It's okay to fail. It tells you where you need to go next. And so that really opened the door, but still, when you look at it, we were at least 10 years, if not more, behind the industry. So, the government trying to do software is very new.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear your reflections. I mean, obviously, they can be better, but not great. Better than really bad is still not great at the thing, in this case, software acquisitions. What's fascinating from perspective, I think a lot of folks throughout the Department of War look at special operations as being faster, leaner, more lethal, more effective, all the things. And in terms of acquisitions, there are some famous folks that are legends within the industry of doing what it takes to get stuff out there fast, rapid responses to operational needs because the consequences are so great. The operations are just that urgent. There's this, I think, admiration from big Army, big Navy. SOCOM's got it figured out. They got that software thing. They're moving fast. They're being agile. I think that brand seems to have maybe there's some truth, I'm sure, but I'm hearing a little bit of criticism, concern that it still wasn't enough. I don't know what the word there is appropriate, but it sounds like there was a challenge, and obviously a learning opportunity, always room for improvement. But it's a little bit of a different of like, oh, we got the software thing figured out. SOCOM's doing it. I think there's a little bit of like, yes, and maybe there's another side of that story.
Yeah, because it's the building the plane while you're flying it is really, what if anything, I would say SOCOM is really good, especially AT&L is really good at that. We will figure it out while we're doing it. Hopefully, the next round won't be as bad, right? But the thing about SOCOM is, and some people don't understand this, I think, at least with the acquisition side of SOCOM, is that there's nothing special. And I know that's gonna really be like, "Ah, no,
Hey, what's the other half of that sentence? I don't know. Let's see.
there's nothing special." We follow the same policies, the same rules, the same acquisition principles. We follow the same things that everyone else does. The special sauce that SOCOM has is that they can do it faster, they're leaner. We have, a PEO sitting right down the hall from us to go and get, you know, signatures and agreements, and, we have our acquisition executives sitting in the building. Most big service, they don't have that access.
Well, is it access or is it a culture as well? When you talk about failing fast, I think a lot of folks say that, but don't do it. They live in a risk averse mindset. Their actions are different than the words in a lot of government leaders. And that's not even a defense or military thing. Healthcare, electric grid. If you fail fast, there's blackouts, right? Like there's a lot of any highly regulated industry will have the language of innovation, but the action of risk aversion. It seems as though we're at the crutch point, the tension point for the innovation being brought into special operations community. And I wonder if it's the what cultural elements and leadership pieces of that. And I also want to get into a little bit of even some of the technical trends as well. But just briefly on the culture, can you reflect on how did you reconcile? How did you see leaders reconcile the culture of fast moving innovation with the consequences of when if something is truly a failure, then there's truly tragic consequences of that for the people in that community. What did you see when you were there?
Yeah, so I will say, it is very like everything else in soft, especially, it is very personality dependent, right? I will say that I just happened to be in my view, the right place at the right time, at least for the Intel PM. I had a PEO that was very, very supportive of innovation. She had a background that where she came from that she was her motto was, "What's the worst that's gonna happen with this?" Right? And there's not any and this is my motto too with the folks that worked for me. There is nothing that you can do or a decision you can make that I cannot fix within 48 hours. So, empower. I was empowered. She trusted me to do the job that I was hired for and to make decisions that, quite honestly, I would say that PMs in general, in big service do not have the authority that I had or may not feel like they have that authority, right?
I think that's the cultural part I'm getting at. But they don't feel like it because the leaders are probably not sending that expectation and support, is my guess. I think that's probably the difference of the SOCOM leadership style is the accountability of that leader to say, and here's I'm going to support you when you do these things. Is that a fair statement? Again, I'm saying this as a person who's never worked in those buildings. I'm sincerely trying to learn what makes it so different.
Yeah, I would say that. And everyone that I encountered, like everywhere else, you find your niches, right? Any folks in the different J directorates within the headquarters or contracting officers, or you find your people. And those are the people that you get stuff done with, right? In general, it's still a bureaucracy. I would say less than a bureaucracy that I've come from with big service, but it still has its bureaucratic issues to some extent. But you find your people, and that's how you get the things done in the building. But most of the time, the folks that you run into there, they are about getting to yes, right? It's yes, but here are the things that you have to figure out how to get through, and that's okay. We want to take risks and things like that. We want to take calculated risks. You don't want to put people's life in danger, right? So at the end of the day, if no one is going to get killed and it's suitable and it meets the requirement, get it done.
It's interesting that you mentioned personality driven. That phrase actually came up in just the prior podcast with another teammate, and that was used to describe information sharing and what was allowed to be shared, I'll say loosely, between intelligence organizations and agencies. And I think I'm paraphrasing his statement in describing so much of it was even post 9/11 personality driven, which is its own really interesting aspect. I don't know if is it tribalism, is it bureaucracy, is it culture? There's something there I want to unpack at a later stage, but I would be angry at myself if I didn't get into some other aspects of your expertise. And that is, interestingly, a combination perhaps of your role leadership with intelligence and also aviation on unmanned systems. I think you've been seeing a lot of the best tech in the world, buying a lot of it, directing the purchase, and then fielding it to operators and warfighters. So I think you've seen a lot in the category of technology trends. So maybe we could talk about that broadly. Of course, I'm not going to ask for anything in the classified space, but broadly in terms of technology trends, the use, the adoption, the integration of technologies, given what you've seen in intelligence and in unmanned, uncrewed systems, what do you see as the most important, exciting, interesting, worth learning about technology trends from those areas of work?
Quite honestly, and this may sound cheesy considering what podcast I'm on right now, but it is the AI ML piece of it, right? That is, and I get it, people throw those words around, not really understanding sometimes what they mean. So I would like to say I was one of the pushers of AI ML in the Intel side, and then, of course, tried to transition that, over to the aviation piece, and they are actually they're working towards that now. But, bringing that in and understanding that you need that layer on top of things that you have to build. And so sometimes we're not ready for technology, even though it's available, especially in the government side. But it was just so interesting to watch even an early adoption version of like machine learning for Intel analysts. And the fact that it was a more rudimentary. And so it took more manpower to help folks learn how to use it. But I think that's the beauty of Turbine One is that I can use it. Like, play with my laptops and can actually create models, which that was the piece that was kind of missing in what I originally started to work with at the command. And that's the reason why when I retired, I chose Turbine One. The product is just amazing to me. And so I'm not trying to do a sales pitch on your podcast, but like it truly is.
Thank you for sharing that. Obviously, I've shared in previous forums as well my own passion for what we're building, how much I wish I had this product when I served. So I'm right there with you. I empathize. I guess to broaden it to the larger community of folks that are seeking to learn how they can adopt and integrate the latest technologies, right? That I think a lot of folks would want to learn from you in terms of, well, how did they find, what can they be doing to find the right tech to get it more fielded out there? I think a theme that's shared, and if I heard you correctly, There's a personal understanding. I know a bit about what this thing is. I've seen the requirements. I put my hands on it, and then I want to either work with it, collaborate, share it out. Do you get the sense that today's, we'll call them senior professionals, mid-career professionals, the folks that are in the acquisitions community, do they have that same sense? Do they know what they're buying? Can they call, this is amazing, that's a bunch of BS? Like, do they have that skill set and capability given the pace of all the innovation, autonomy, innovation, automation, all this AI stuff? Honestly, I've seen a lot of things recently. Just the nuclear power things are coming back again. It's got like there's a lot of super complex technologies being brought in to serve in challenging environments. But I think a lot of career professionals may be curious about how to discern between, you joked, hey, you heard a lot of this AI stuff. Well, how do you discern between what's a good car and a bad car if you don't know how to test drive it? Like you did that in your own career. How can other folks get that level of insight and capability that you clearly have deployed?
Yeah. So, I'm a program manager by trade. I am not a technical expert. I think the big thing is surrounding yourself with the right technical experts that understand that technology and can advise you on the best, right? But to do more things like I think we're seeing with exercises and demonstrations and things going on where you kind of just do best of breed, bring everything out there and figure out what works best for your users, get their feedback, right? And I think more and more, like, that is one big thing that SOCOM does, and in that they really rely on their users being very professionally trained and understanding what they're using and being able to provide that feedback on those products that they get in front of them. And they are the first to tell you when something is just sucks, right? They have no problem sharing that information. But they'll also in many cases tell you what you could do better. And so that is a vital for vendors too, right? Like industry is part of the stakeholder. And I think sometimes government forgets that. They think in-house that they have to have the expertise. They don't have it. There's a reason why industry exists, and they're there to provide the next level of the tech that's needed, especially in the age that we're coming into of, wars are fought. They're not necessarily fought by tanks and guns anymore, right? They're fought by information, data, cyber, that sort of thing. So I think the big thing is getting hands-on, having the right technical expertise on your team, utilizing utilizing all of the acquisition things that are available to you. And I say that to say, you know, IDIQs are great, but if you're trying to get after something, do some type of commercial offering through, one of the softworks, AFWorks, Sibers, that sort of thing. Go after small businesses because I tell you what, they're a lot easier to work with in the long run, personal experience, but also use OTAs, right? You could still have a competition, but you get somebody to put an OTA. It's a lot less rigorous than a full-on open competitions, source selection board that requires tons of time and energy with your folks that need to be doing other things. So just utilizing the tools that are provided in part of your toolkit as an acquisition officer, right? So that would be my advice is find find the way around the issues. Find the way around, if you're running into a roadblock, find another avenue and be creative about it.
Yeah, that's very good advice. I'm thinking through my own personal experiences of how many folks have embraced that. I mean, it's a little bit topical in the news, so it may date the podcast, so to speak, but there is a presentation today from the Secretary of War about a bunch of things in acquisition reform and streamlining. And one of the things in there, I think, is something like OTAs should be the default, as an example, as a contracting method, because it's just faster, as an example. There's a trade-off of speed is better than perfection. I'm paraphrasing this concept of the intent behind that guidance. I think it's what you're describing. I think there's a way in which the market is catching up to your Brandy's experiences and where you've been successful. In a way, your traction and your years of work seem to have been so inspiring that it's brought a larger market activity that this guidance policy, hey, y'all should be doing the same thing, is basically what I'm seeing in the news. And so, as given that maybe the market, the broader defense, and yeah, I'll call it the defense market, intelligence as well, is catching up to some of your experiences. Can I ask, as a kind of a magic wand question, if you could redesign this military and intelligence acquisition process to be better at serving its mission? You mentioned get more field testing. That's a technique that should be used more broadly. But in terms of the process itself and the larger, so not as an individual, but as the system, if you had a magic wand, is there anything else that you would change as a look back on your years of service?
Well, I think, the Secretary of War is busy doing, I think, exactly what I would do. And that is, I appreciate the draft memo I just recently read that talks about doing the things that you said and basically getting after it faster, failing faster. It may not be the right solution, but we're going to try something and then we're going to learn and we're going to figure out the better solution. So I say, if I had a magic wand, it would be thankfully what I'm starting to see now, but also and I didn't own this process, but the requirements process, right? It is so lengthy and I think there's reform going on that side as well. But even on the SOCOM side, it's so lengthy and just iteration after iteration, like as if you cannot go anywhere without a perfect and complete requirement document, right? Until it is the very best 100%, we're not even going to, start a program. And honestly, why do we even need a program? It's a requirement. Just it just have a bunch of projects, right? Somebody needed it, somebody can validate it. Let's move on and find a solution. So honestly, I would take some of those levels out as well on that side. I think users get very frustrated with the system because it could take a year or more, just to get the requirement validated. We should be doing more urgent operational needs, right? We may not be in a war necessarily, but it doesn't mean that there aren't things going on around the world where people are saying, hey, we need something that does this. Well, great. Let's get it validated.
There's a positivity, Brandy, in your reflections here. I think it's also a little newsy. So, at the risk of sounding political, we are in a government shutdown. We are in I think, the longest government shutdown. My sister is an active duty lieutenant colonel in the Army. I was talking to her last night. The stories of how people are struggling out at Fort Stewart, are just grim. It's sad. It is not a happy time for a lot of folks. And yet, I think what you just reflected upon is that in spite of that dynamic, unavoidable as it may be from what we can work on every day, there's still, I think you said, room for optimism. There's actually a lot of positive changes in requirements reform, acquisition streamlining, a leadership prioritization for speed. That sounds more optimistic than the phone call I was feeling last night, Brandy. And so I want to recognize that contrast, but also confirm I'm not hearing it wrong. I think you said that there's actually a lot of room for hope and enthusiasm for where this process is going. Did I hear that right?
I think so, not political at all, but if sooner they can get the budget, the CR, whatever we're going to do here done, I think that there's a lot of great great work that can be done now because I think, the administration at this point is saying, "Hey, we know we gotta do better when it comes to acquisition, and we know we have to be faster, and we have to meet needs in a timely manner." And I think everybody in the acquisition community feels the same way. It was just a matter of being able to have somebody in leadership or multiple people in leadership come down from the top and say, "You can. Here's what you can do." Because nobody wants to be the person that does the wrong things, right? But at the end of the day, I think, you're about to get power to do those things.
Well, Brandy, you spent over 25 years in defense acquisitions, 17 of those, it seems, within the special operations programs. You clearly have delivered and achieved a level of innovation and smart risk taking for many great years and delivered transformative capabilities forward. What you're describing sounds elusively simple. Take smart risks, push things forward, test things out in the field, rely upon experts. And yet, I know from firsthand experience, it's incredibly difficult for so many folks to execute. And so I'm grateful for what you've shared here in terms of how you've achieved those breakthroughs. And I am personally motivated by your optimism at a time of otherwise challenging news stories that can hit us on a regular basis these days. And so thank you so much for sharing your reflections here. I'll give you the last word in terms of anything else we're sharing in terms of where you see this market going. Any special thank yous to those that have guided you along the path. Really just an open call to those that are seeking to be as motivated as you still are. Any final reflections on your years in this work?
Oh, wow, yeah, I wouldn't be where I was without my daddy, so and God. But the other piece is that, I happen to I wouldn't say happen, I was placed in the right place at the right time to do the things that I was able to do. Was it all good? No, but some of it was, and that's the part that I choose to look back and say, "Okay, this is great."
I mean, you were literally in the chaplain's office on 9/11. I mean, like, that's like a pretty specific. Can we just go back to that part of your story? I was like, yeah, there's a call to service there that's probably bigger than any one moment. But yeah, it's rather fascinating. Thank you for sharing that as you did.
Thank you, but I would say to all of those that may be younger acquisition professionals, right? I used to teach them as part of my extra duty, at least at SOCOM, about how to be an acquisition program manager or whatever. But I would say, sometimes you may not feel empowered, but I would say you take your empowerment. And I know not everyone has that personality, but if at all possible, just assume you have the power to make the decisions until someone pulls you back. Just get out there and just start doing things until somebody tells you to stop running with scissors. So, at least that's how I like to live my life, and, you know what? You'll get stuff done, and most of the time, if you make those decisions, your leaders will usually back you up because then they didn't have to deal with it, right? So, at the end of the day, take your power.
Thank you for that advice, Brandi Evans. Thank you so much for joining Defense Disrupted and for sharing your reflections on an extraordinary career.
Thank you, Ian. I appreciate the invite.